Over the last few years, there have been some great NFL players that just somehow fell off. Whether it was like their age or they're traded or they got put with the wrong team, there's just somehow something didn't work out for them. Here are some of the players, to me personally, that have fallen off and just have been shitty. Let's get into it. The first player that seems like they took a fall off was Odell Beckham Jr. He was one of the most dominant weapons within the NFL from 2014 to 2019. OBJ, he was elite and everyone knew him and loved him. The kids, they were all trying to dance like him, and I'm pretty sure we all at one point had our phone backgrounds as the picture of him with the Joker gloves. From 2014 to 2018, OBJ was with the Giants, where he really paved his way. His rookie year was amazing. He broke rookie records for receiving, had an Offensive Rookie of the Year award, and then also had one of the most amazing one-handed catches against the Cowboys. For the next 4 years, OBJ was a staple for the NFL and really like the Giants until 2019, where he finally had drama. He became a diva. Well, he always was a diva, but he finally came to an end point with his time in the Giants and got sent away to Cleveland, where he was reunited with his good friend Jarvis Landry. With the Browns, OBJ was actually pretty good, and Baker Mayfield did pretty good with OBJ. For the first season, OBJ would have 1,000 yards and some change and 4 touchdowns that season, and then the next season he would have a decline. He would only have 23 receptions, 319 yards, and 3 touchdowns, which them are pretty good stats until the 7th week, where he got hurt in the game against the Cincinnati Bengals, and he had an ACL tear and was out for the rest of the season. The comeback season of OBJ would then be a weird one, where he'd end up with a ring, but it would all be at what cost? OBJ would play 6 games with the Browns, only having 232 yards. While he would be released from the Browns as a settlement within the team, they would pay $4 million just to cut him. This is because he didn't live up to expectations, he got injured, and he was also a diva. And then an already stacked and building Rams team, at this point were winning games and had a built squad, decided to add the free agent OBJ for the remainder of the season. So OBJ would then have 27 receptions and 305 yards with the Rams. The Rams would then go on to the Super Bowl and win, and OBJ would have 2 receptions, 52 yards, and 1 touchdown. But within this game, OBJ tore his ACL. So even while having a great game within the Super Bowl and watching his team on the sideline win a Super Bowl, OBJ got his ring, but would have to sit out a whole year due to his ACL tear in 2022. So he won a Super Bowl ring. At what cost? After sitting out for a year, in 2023, being healed, the Ravens would take a shot on OBJ with a 1-year, $18 million deal contract. OBJ's season wasn't anything spectacular. He had 35 receptions, 565 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He'd visit the AFC Championship and lose to the Chiefs, and now OBJ is on the Dolphins looking to get back to the Super Bowl. OBJ has definitely fallen off, but will still always be an NFL great. The second player is Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook got his start with Minnesota in 2018, where he played 10 games, rushed for 133 attempts, have 615 yards, and 2 touchdowns. In 2019, actually played 14 games over 10 games. He would have 250 attempts, 1,135 yards, and 13 touchdowns. It'd be his first 1,000-yard season in his career, and it was 2019. And then in 2020, Dalvin Cook had 14 games played again, 312 attempts, 1,557 yards, 16 touchdowns, and it was one of the greatest seasons Dalvin Cook has had in his whole career. In 2021, Dalvin Cook only played 13 games versus playing 14 games. Dalvin Cook had 249 attempts, 1,159 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So 10 less touchdowns than the year before, and 400 less yards than the year before. And then in 2022, Dalvin Cook with Minnesota is last year, he had 17 games played, 264 yards, 1,173 yards, and 8 touchdowns, which is a little bit better than his year before. Dalvin Cook then would be cut by Minnesota in the offseason due to just a large cap hit and pay cut not being optioned for Cook, and Cook would be invited to do an ayahuasca trip with Aaron Rodgers, where Rodgers would convince Dalvin Cook to come on over to the Jets like he was doing with every other motherfucker that was going over to the Jets. Dalvin Cook would sign a 1-year deal deal worth $7 million, the New York Jets, including a $5.8 million guarantee. Cook would get little to no work, having 67 carries, 214 yards, 15 receptions, 78 yards, and that was it. No touchdowns for either. Rodgers going down didn't help, and having a Zach Wilson-led Jets offense also isn't really good. I mean, both of the running backs in the rooms, Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook, were getting upset about the work that they were getting, as well as Michael Carter too. Cook would be cut late in the season though, just so he could join a team for a playoff chance. He'd be signed to the Ravens, where he would not play a single snap in the regular season, but he would be able to play some snaps in the divisional round against the Texans. Ultimately, the same fate with OBJ. He would lose in the AFC Championship against the Chiefs, and now Cook is a free agent and is looking for a team. I don't think Cook will ever get back to the form that he was in 2020 and in 2021 and in 2022, because I think that the injuries and the time that he's missed and the speed has just got away from him. But as a Vikings fan, gotta say, love this man, and I hope the best for him, and I hope that he gets back to the magic that he once had. Either way, always special place in my heart for this guy. It's crazy to see how fast that he fell off though. Next player was an up and rising stud, and that's Chase Young. Chase Young in 2020 was drafted with the second pick in the draft by the Redskins, but then they became the Washington Football Team, which by the way is the stupidest fucking name ever. I don't care if it's just a placement name. Stupid name. You could have been anything else. Okay, but Chase Young, he started off pretty hot and got himself Defensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, he was a dominant force in 2020, the COVID year. I mean, he had forced fumbles. He was a menace for being a rookie. But for some reason, he just lost his magic. His stats in 2020 were he played in 15 games. He had 4 pass deflections. He had 4 forced fumbles. He had 3 of them recovered, 57 yards, and even a touchdown. Which, by the way, he looked like Dion running that thing with the one hand. I wouldn't have been surprised if that man would have started high stepping. He had 7 sacks, or 7.5. He had 32 tackles, 44 combined, 12 assists, 10 tackle for loss, and 12 QB hits, and he was also awarded Pro Bowl award. In 2021, he would only play in 9 games. He would have 2 pass deflections, 2 forced fumbles, and 1.5 sacks. He'd have 26 combined tackles, 15 solo tackles, 3 tackle for losses, and 4 QB hits. Then against the Buccaneers in week, Chase Young would have an ACL tear and would be out for the 2021 season. Chase Young wouldn't come back till later in the season because of his ACL tear, and he'd only play in 3 games, and within the 3 games, he only started in 2 of them, and he had 5 combined tackles, 3 solo tackles, 2 assists, and 1 QB hit for that whole year in 2022 after coming off of ACL tear. And then in 2023, he got hurt in preseason with a cervical neck injury, where he wouldn't return to action until week 2. He'd eventually be traded before deadline, where Washington would trade him over to San Francisco 49ers. The 2023 season stats for Washington, Chase had 5 sacks. He had 15 combined tackles, 12 solo tackles, 3 assists, 6 tackle for loss, 9 QB hits, and then would go to the 49ers, where his motivation would be questioned. In fact, there's a lot of clips of like Chase Young just giving up on the play when he was on the San Francisco 49ers. But with the 49ers, he played in 9 games. He had 1 pass deflection, 2.5 sacks, so he had 7.5 sacks for the 2023 season, matching his first ever season. He had 25 combined tackles, 17 solo tackles, 8 assists, 7 tackle for loss, 15 QB hits, and he made it to the Super Bowl with the 49ers, but ended up losing. After losing, Chase Young would go and sign a nice little contract with the Saints, which is actually pretty surprising because Chase Young hasn't proved anything and he's not good. But Chase Young ended up getting a fairly decent contract where he would get a 1-year, $13 million deal. With being unproven and having a lot of injury history, getting a $13 million deal with $13 million of it guaranteed, that's a pretty good deal. Chase Young's production has definitely fallen off though, and he has not gotten back to his rookie year. Even though he had 7.5 sacks, don't get me wrong, the play and the person that he was in his rookie year is not the Chase Young that we saw in 2023. And I don't think that we'll ever get to the elite form that we saw and how dominant he was in 2020. I mean, really, I thought that he was going to be like one of the top edge rushers like Myles Garrett. It was going to be, Micah Parsons and Chase Young. That's who we're going to be talking about, because 2021 Micah Parsons popped off with 13 sacks. Yeah, so it's just like we hope the best for him in the Saints, and maybe he does somehow drink a magic potion and become the best fucking right end of all time, and I was wrong. But I don't think that Chase Young will ever get back to glory, and he's majorly fallen off. Player number 4 on this list is actually Hunter Renfrow, which I don't know if a lot of people know Hunter Renfrow, or really care about him, but I really liked him. And coming out of Clemson, he was a stud, and he was a demon from the slot. I mean, this guy had grit. He was a high IQ, scrappy, real grinder, the guy you'd want to have date your daughter, Okay, actually I'll stop playing. But not besides the jokes, he really was a good receiver. And when he was drafted by the Raiders, the first 2 years he wasn't the greatest receiver, but he was manageable. I mean, he was a 5th round pick who his first year played 13 games, started only 4, had 49 receptions, 605 yards, 4 touchdowns, and would start working his way up with the Raiders in the John Gruden offense. In 2020, he would even be just as good, where he would be blooming, having 16 games over 13. He would have 56 catches over 49 receptions. He'd have 656 yards over 605 yards, and he'd have 2 touchdowns versus 4. So touchdowns less, but better yards, right? And then in 2021, he finally blooms, where he would play in 17 games and only start in 9. He would have 103 receptions. He would have 1,038 yards, 9 touchdowns, and he would be chosen to a Pro Bowl. Within this year, he would be looking like a stud, and the Raiders fans would have something to rave about because, I mean, he was the number 1 receiver with Henry Ruggs. Henry Ruggs having his situation going on, and then Zay Jones being their number 2 receiver. Hunter Renfrow was their number 1 guy, and I mean, they made it to the playoffs that year. I mean, they got fucking smacked by the Bengals, the Bengals went on to the Super Bowl to lose against the Rams. But either way, Hunter Renfrow was actually a very, very good receiver, and people thought that he was going to be one of the best, receivers for the Raiders for the next 2 years. Well, I'll tell you this, the next 2 years would be Josh McDaniels led Raiders, and man, did Hunter Renfrow do nothing, absolutely nothing. In 2022, he would play 10 games with only 1 game started, and he would have 36 receptions, 330 yards, and 2 touchdowns, regressing horribly from every single year he's been in the league. And then in 2023, he would only play 17 games, 3 games started, 25 receptions, and 255 yards with 0 touchdowns, being even worse than his 2022 season. Even with Antonio Pierce, Hunter Renfrow never really got back to the form, obviously, and they didn't really give him a shot because he got cut from the Raiders. But I think it was more of a cap casualty because of the contract that he signed after his 2021 season that they were cutting him for. The fact that they didn't want to give him a shot because Hunter Renfrow seems like he still has some gas in the tank. I mean, he may be 28 years old because he was drafted when he was 24 years old, but he may be 28 and a little older. He still has spurts of play, and I mean, he hasn't had the games or targets or even the experience that he should for the 5 years that he's been in the league. But I think that Hunter Renfrow could go to a good team and, be a number 3 or a good slot receiver. I don't think that he'll ever hit 1,000 yards again in his career, but you can thank Josh McDaniels for ruining his career. I think that Hunter Renfrow, he'll be special to some Raiders fans, and I'm sure that the Bills will probably be the team that will pick him up because, I feel like they've been missing that slot ever since Cole Beasley, I guess got shipped off. Plus, I'm pretty sure their 3rd receiver is Chase Claypool. Pretty sure that Hunter Renfrow could fill Chase Claypool's spot. No offense to Chase Claypool. I was literally thinking about putting him into this video. He's an honorable mention, but he couldn't block a fucking 2x4 if it was standing up straight. So, I really don't think that it would be a hard competition for Hunter Renfrow. But a 1 season that he had 1,000 yards and then the fall off after, there's something that needs to be studied within that, But either way, gotta love the guy. And hopefully he gets back to his form in some way. This next one I feel like is pretty obvious just because ever since he got traded, he's been asked, but that's Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson, he was great whenever he started with the Seahawks, being drafted in 2012 and starting immediately and being an impact immediately, being announced to a Pro Bowl his first 4 years. He would miss the Pro Bowl in 2016, but even when he didn't make the Pro Bowl in 2016, it was one of his best years. It was actually the best year of his career. And then in 2017, he made the Pro Bowl, and in 2018, he made the Pro Bowl, and then in 2019, he had one of his greatest seasons, and he would be an MVP candidate. His stats were, he had 341 completions, 516 attempts, 4,110 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, and he was an MVP candidate. In 2020, he would be also having another great year with 384 completions, 558 attempts, 68.8 completion percentage, 4,212 yards, 40 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. He would also be announced to the Pro Bowl Bowl. And then in 2021, his last year as a Seahawk, he would have 259 completions, 400 attempts, 64.8 completion percentage, 3,113 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. The Broncos then thought it would be a great idea to sign a coach that has no clue what the game of football is, and then also trade for Russell Wilson in a blockbuster trade where they're given arm and a leg just to bring on over washed up Russell Wilson, which, by the way, in 2021, Russell Wilson looked like a completely different version of himself compared to MVP candidate 2019 and 2020 Russell Wilson. So when they traded for him, it was kind of like a suspect kind of trade, and then you'd be like, oh, okay, it's just a trade, right? They gave a big amount, but hopefully it pays off. Then they gave him a $245 million guaranteed contract saying that this is the guy, Russell Wilson is our future franchise QB. And then with the Broncos, his first year, he had 292 completions, 483 attempts, 60.5 completion percentage, 3,521 yards, and 16 touchdowns versus 11 interceptions. So compared to his 2021 season, he had more yards, a worse completion percentage, he had less touchdowns, and more interceptions. So therefore, he threw more yards, but was shittier. So, like, what does that matter? And then in 2023, he played 15 games, just like he did in 2022. And then he would have 297 completions, 447 attempts, 66.4 completion percentage, and 3,070 yards. He'd have 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. And in this season, he was actually pretty good. He had the Broncos on a winning streak. I mean, there was moments where he looked like, literally the 2020 Russell Wilson's in the Seahawks. You know, he looked like he was getting back to his old self, but it was all fluke because they would ask him, hey man, are you going to waive your injury clause? Otherwise, we're not going to let you play. And Russell Wilson would obviously be like, well, why would I waive it? I don't want to get fucked if I get injured, so I'm obviously not going to waive it. And then Sean high-ass fucking Payton was like, hey, we're gonna bench you for Jarrett fucking Stidham, a bum. The same bum that benched Derek Carr. And then Russell Wilson was like, okay, cool, sweet. And then they cut Russell Wilson. And just like that, Mr. Unlimited diarrhea poop shit fucking guy is off of the Broncos. And Mr. Let's Ride, Bronco Country, Let's Ride, is now with the Steelers, where he will make an attempt to resurgence his career.
Right? And I've been thinking about what my alter ego would be, and I think I have an alter ego. His name's Mr. Unlimited. You gotta be unlimited. You gotta have a thought process of being unlimited. So when people ask you, what you're thinking about or what you want to do in life or where you want to go, you gotta be unlimited.
The time when you come home after church and you realize that your new Great Dane, we got 3 of them, right? So the little one, the little puppy, has pooped everywhere, all over his crate. Diarrhea poop. Unlimited diarrhea. Unlimited.
Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride.
And now we'll see if Russell Wilson can get back to the form that he was. I'm sure Mike Tomlin will help him a lot because I really think that Pete Carroll was what made Russell Wilson. Don't get me wrong, Russell Wilson's talented, very, very talented QB, but the system that he was in is what made him, and the Broncos kind of proved that. I think that this year he's going to stand out for the Steelers, and the Broncos are going to pay for it because the Steelers are paying the Broncos for the Steelers to have Russell Wilson. So it's a whole weird thing, but it's pretty crazy. Either way, that's it for the video, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this, and if you guys want to see more of the video like this, let me know. It's either I make something like this again, otherwise I have other ideas with NFL content. Either way, I hope you enjoyed, and fuck off.